Look, Packers, I know you've got plenty of hardware and jewelry all in the case. Certainly infinitely more than the Vikings have got. But look, Veronica Stone's got a ring. I got a ring now. What's more in the trophy case? That's all. What's up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of Lombardi Time Brews. I'm your host, John Delray. Today, previewing Packers versus Jaguars. Yeah, we're back in the saddle. First, I do just want to say a very, very quick thank you for all of the messages, comments, etc., outpouring of support for Claudia and I as we actually got married last weekend. But the return of watch parties is indeed coming this Sunday. It was a wonderful week off, but it is time to be back with you people talking about the Green Bay Packers. So let's spare no more time. Let's talk Packers versus Jaguars. And so the very first thing is covering the news, and there was a fair bit of it, at least kind of developing over the last couple of days. For one, in case you were wondering if the Green Bay Packers are wearing their 50s throwbacks this year, in addition to the winter warning outfits that they just wore, yeah, they are. Coming up actually on Sunday, November 3rd against the Detroit Lions. That is the game at Lambeau, of course. The Packers are again rolling out the 1950s throwbacks. That was announced earlier today. But in addition, there also is a transaction that you may have been confused by because it was a little unorthodox earlier in the week. Jonathan Ford's deadline for coming off of the IR was coming rapidly. Packers had to make a decision because with players on IR who are designated to return, you got two options. One, you either keep them on IR and their season is done, or two, you actually put them on the 53-man roster. But of course, a side effect of that is you actually have to take someone off of your 53 if you don't have an open spot. So what the Packers did was they activated Jonathan Ford so that he could play this year. And they released a vested veteran in the form of long snapper Matt Orzik. Now, I saw earlier in the week, and maybe this has all been settled in your heads, but just in case it's not, Matt Orzik is still the long snapper for the Packers. Rich Bisaccia very much squashed that yesterday when he said as such. But basically what they did here was they cut a vested veteran who, frankly, I don't think they thought would have a lot of interest league-wide anyway, plus it's someone who didn't have to go through waivers. So they cut Matt Orzik in order to bring Ford back. Then they released Jonathan Ford with the hopes of bringing him back on the practice squad. Ford, over the last couple of days, has gone through the waiver process. He indeed go unclaimed, and the Packers just today signed him back to the practice squad. So basically, if you were confused by all of the Jonathan Ford, Matt Orzik practice squad, all that stuff that went on this week, basically was just Brian Gutekunst manipulating roster management to get Ford back and on the practice squad. And Matt Orzik was just kind of the sacrificial lamb in all of that, but he is still the long snapper. So, all right, let's go to Packers Jaguars injury report. And frankly, this is kind of the healthiest the Packers have been all year. So Quay Walker, he's practiced 2 days in a row, but per Matt LaFleur earlier today, he still remains in concussion protocol. So we'll have to see if he receives actual game clearance. Keep in mind, when it comes to concussion protocol, really anything dealing with a concussion, practicing on a limited basis, very, very different than actually getting game clearance. Right now, he's in the mode of he can practice. We'll see about a game. He's officially marked as questionable. Then you got Corey Ballantyne, who really hasn't practiced at all this week. He's officially marked as doubtful. Then on the rest of the questionable tags, you got Josh Myers, Devontae Wyatt. They both got those tags, but they've been practicing at least in some capacity. And while Matt LaFleur didn't say it, it does kind of lead you to believe that there is at least some optimism there that both will be able to go. Certainly Myers, you would think, is going to be able to go. Wyatt, since he's strung off a couple practices where he's been active, you'd think he may be making his return as well. And that's really it for the Packers side of things. On the Jaguars side, Doug Peterson, the head coach, is a little bit more open about injuries down there. Half of their running back duo, Travis Etienne, he is expected to be a game-time decision. Their left tackle, Cam Robinson, he is now off of concussion protocol, like the list. He's totally good to go. He'll be playing on Sunday. Then you've got two IR players that may be coming back for the Jaguars, although we just don't know. One would be linebacker Olakun, the other safety Wingard. They're both are trending well, supposedly, but Doug Peterson left the door open as to whether they would go this week or whether the Jaguars would wait another week in order to activate them. So ultimately, we don't know when it comes to those two, but Cam Robinson, good to go. Travis Etienne, not even the Jaguars supposedly know until we get closer to the game. So who are the Jaguars? Well, let's take a look at that depth chart. At quarterback, Trevor Lawrence. Look, I'm going to get to this a little bit more in detail later. I think the statements about Trevor Lawrence having a bad year, Trevor Lawrence not fulfilling his, promise, a little overstated. Dude's at 9 touchdowns, 3 picks on the year. Maybe not a spectacular year. Not a bad year either. Running backs, then you got Travis Etienne, like I said, game time decision, and Tank Bigsby. We're definitely going to be talking about that Tank later on. At wide receiver, you got Christian Kirk, rookie wideout, who is doing great things. Brian Thomas Jr., the Jaguars' leading receiver. Then you also got Gabe Davis doing Gabe Davis things at wide receiver. Big plays followed up by absolutely nothing. Then Evan Ingram. Now, Ingram supposedly is going to be making his return. I know it's been like, how much is he really going to play? There's been some questions about that. But Evan Ingram, if he plays in any capacity, is certainly a boon for the Jaguars passing game. Then you got Cam Robinson at left tackle, Ezra Cleveland left guard, Mitch Morse center, Brandon Scherf right guard, and Anton Harrison at right tackle. And yes, indeed, that is former Packer right there. Cole Van Lannon. He's still hanging on down there in Jacksonville. On the defensive side of things, yes, indeed, the Jaguars do lead a 4-3 defense. They got Josh Hines-Allen and Trayvon Walker, the former number 1 pick. They're at the defensive ends. They are by far the Jaguars' top 2 pass rushers. Then more so in the interior, you've got Devon Hamilton as well as Eric Armstead. Then at linebacker, Ventrell Miller, Devin Lloyd, Muma Olakun might be coming back this week. We're not sure on that one yet. And then in the secondary, it is a much maligned secondary. Tyson Campbell, Ronald Darby, they're okay corners, granted both of them with QB ratings over 100 when targeted. And then you got safety Cisco Johnson. I'm going to be totally frank here. This might be one of the worst safety duos in the league. And former Packer Darnell Savage isn't even cracking it down there in their starting lineup. If you want to know where Savage has been playing, he's actually been mixing it up a lot with Jerrion Jones, the nickel corner. Most of Savage's snaps this year have come in the slot. So in terms of what the Jaguars do, who they are, they're sitting at a whopping 2-5 thus far in the year. But don't be completely deceived by that record. They've got wins against the Patriots and the Colts, but their losses have come against the Bears, Texans, Bills, Browns, and Dolphins. Like I said, 2-5. It's not stellar. They're 2-5 for a reason, but there are a couple things to keep in mind here. One, both of their wins have come in the last 3 weeks. So this is, a team that is trending upward. They did start 0-4. Now they've won 2 of their last 3. And 3 of those 5 losses have been within 6 points. Now their losses to both the Bills and the Bears, yeah, those were more of the blowout variety. But those other 3 include, the Texans, the Browns, also not a great team. Okay, fine. But against the Texans and Dolphins, they played very competitive games. And that was the Dolphins in week 1, pre-Tua going down. So that was a very legit Dolphins team that they held within 3 points. So there is at least, some form of stability here for the Jaguars. And I say all of that basically just to say, while I don't know as if I totally can go with the narrative that this is a trap game for the Packers, I'm also not going to pretend that the Jaguars are like this complete disaster train wreck. We can just walk all over them and not even try kind of team either. So let's discuss where the Jaguars rank realistically. In terms of the defensive side of the ball, oh, there's the tab. All right. In terms of the defensive side of the ball, run defense rankings, they're actually 7th in the NFL, giving up only 96.3 yards per game on the ground. In terms of pass defense rankings, this is where it gets a little rougher for the Jacksonville Jaguars. Ultimately, they are 30th in the NFL, giving up 275.3 yards through the air. Now, that's over the last 3 weeks. If you extrapolate that to full season, just as bad. They're in the bottom 3 in the NFL. In terms of points per game over the entire season, they are 30th in the NFL. They are giving up 27.7 points per game. Yes, that is buoyed up a little bit by giving up 47 to the Bills. Still, though, 27.7, awfully high, 30th in the NFL. Then in terms of red zone defense, 78.2% of the drives for opposing offenses that make it to the red zone turn into touchdowns against the Jaguars. That is dead last in the NFL. Earlier in the year, first 2-3, true Midwest there, 2-3 weeks and the season, we talked about how the Packers were a team that was struggling in the red zone. Now they've gotten slightly better. Their offensive averages are now sitting at like 54%. It's like kind of inching better. Go against the Jaguars and you really can up that number. It is a correction style game, at least in the red zone. The Jaguars have been truly putrid in the red zone defensively. So the Packers should be able to take advantage. If they can't, then I'm not sure red zone problems are getting fixed. Then for where the Jaguars rank on the offensive side of the ball, little bit better here. 121.7 yards per game on the ground. That's good for 19th in the NFL. In terms of how often they're attempting to run it, also 19th in the NFL. So doing pretty well in that regard. In terms of their passing offense, again, this is one of those numbers that shows Trevor Lawrence maybe a little bit better than the narrative. 258 yards passing per game. Good for 5th in the NFL over their last 3. And in terms of attempts, 20th in the NFL over the last stretch of time. Whenever you're 20th in attempts and yet 5th in results, yeah, it kind of speaks for itself. Over the whole season, though, a couple more stats. In terms of points per game, they're getting 20.7, tied for 21st in the NFL. And then red zone rank, 50%. So that's 50% of their red zone drives actually turn into touchdowns, 24th in the NFL. Interestingly, at home, the Jaguars are worse at home. Only 37.5% of their red zone trips result in touchdowns. That's 25th in the NFL. Looking over the whole season in terms of turnover margin, they're at a negative 0.6, 27th in the NFL. Green Bay, of course, still one of the top teams in the league in that regard. Penalties, they got only 6 penalties called against them per game, 11th in the NFL. And then I love how when these are like perfectly even, sacks given up. Trevor Lawrence is getting sacked 2.4 times a game. That's 14th in the NFL. And then in terms of sacks gotten, 2.3 times per game. That's 18th in the NFL. So let's break this down. What does all of that information about the Jaguars, what does that really mean for the Packers? How do the Packers attack this Jacksonville Jaguar defense? There's really a couple keys here. Just do these keys and you should just have some success. And I'm not even going to talk about the run game. We talked about how the Jaguars are actually, better than you'd think in terms of run defense, but they have a very, very glaring weakness here. There's a pretty big coincidence in their 2 blowout losses. Talked about how 3 of the 5 are close, 2 not. And the numbers were really, really similar. In those 2 games, Josh Allen and Caleb Williams combined for some stellar stat lines. Allen, 23 of 30, 263 yards, 4 passing touchdowns. Caleb Williams against the Jaguars, 23 of 39, or 23 of 29, 226 passing yards, 4 touchdowns. And you'd think with stat lines like that, we're talking like 5, nearly 600 yards through the air, really good completion percentage, 8 passing touchdowns those 2 games. You'd think that it would just be like dropping dimes, dropping bombs, a big play after big play. But that hasn't been the reality. In fact, they've given up a ton of intermediate and short passes that have progressively turned into bigger plays through yak or even subpar tackling on the part of the Jaguars. In fact, to get more specific, Williams and Allen combined to go 0 for 3 on throws over 20 yards down the field in those 2 games. Think about that. All those yards, all those touchdowns, and yet neither quarterback completed a pass over 20 yards. It's a statistical anomaly if it happens once. If it happens twice, and it's in both games that you get blown out by, well, now we're beginning to talk about a certified trend. So while they were 0 for 3 targeting more than 20 yards downfield, both quarterbacks had 100% completion percentages, both behind the line of scrimmage and within 10 yards. If you're talking about Caleb Williams, you even can expand that to going from 10 to 20 yards, whereas Josh Allen did have like 1 miss in that category. So what they did was they executed the short, the intermediate, and they didn't rely on the long ball. And that may go a little bit against what Jordan Love wants to do. But ultimately, it kind of seems like the pattern for how best to guarantee victory against this subpar Jaguars secondary. And in that way, think of it this way. The Jaguars defense is kind of reminiscent of the Packers defense of the last couple of years. Hey, you can put up points. You can gouge us, but it's going to be death by 1,000 paper cuts. You can complete 10-yard pass after 10-yard pass, but you are not going to complete a 40-yard pass against us. That's what the Packers lived by the last couple of years, right? That's what the Jaguars are doing. They're also similar to the Packers in one other way, in that most of their pass rush comes from pretty much just 2 dudes. The Jaguars have 17 sacks on the year, 8 of which have come from only 2 guys, and that's their 2 starting edge rusher, Josh Hines-Allen and Trayvon Walker. So if Zach Tom and Rasheed Walker can handle business against those 2, plus they can execute within 20 yards, things should be pretty good for the Green Bay Packers offense. Now, as for how to stop the Jags offense, honestly, this is the tougher side to figure out. And frankly, it may be a blessing. This feels so opposite of last year to say. It might be a blessing for the Jaguars if Travis Etienne can't go in this game, because Tank Bigsby has been doing great this season. Thus far in the year, Bigsby has only 12 more carries than Etienne, but he has 15 more broken tackles forced and 4 more runs that have gone at least 15 yards. He's also averaging a positively ridiculous 4.58 yards after contact per attempt. Just to give you an idea of how good Tank Bigsby has been running the ball, his 25 missed tackles forced is 4th in the NFL, and he's done that only 67 carries. The 3 guys ahead of him on the list, granted, it tops out at 30, but the 3 guys ahead of him on the list all have over 100 carries. And his 4.58 yards after contact per attempt tops in the NFL by a full third of a yard for running backs with at least 26 carries. And as for the aerial attack, I mentioned Trevor Lawrence earlier, how people are talking about how it's a down year for Lawrence. He's not living up to his promise. Dude hasn't been bad. He's had 9 touchdowns compared to only 3 picks on the year. He's been incredibly turnover averse. And it's not really fluky either. PFF's tracking does have him at more big-time throws than turnover-worthy plays. So maybe the 9-to-3 ratio is a little generous, but it tracks. And it's not like he's lighting up the scoreboard, but he's not doing bad. One reason for his moderate success has been Brian Thomas Jr., certainly the leading receiver on the Jaguars. If the Jaguars do get a big play, generally speaking, it's been to Brian Thomas Jr. And watching him versus Jair is actually one of the matchups that I'm most excited for. But given how proficient Lawrence has been, the best way to beat him? Probably through some pressure. Because the Jaguars' offensive line, kind of inconsistent in terms of their pass pro. The tackles are a lot worse overall than the interior of the line. Cam Robinson, the left tackle, who is going to play in this game by all accounts, he's leading the team with 4 sacks allowed in spite of playing the fewest snaps along the line. Then realistically, their second worst offensive lineman is probably right tackle Anton Harrison, who he's only given up 2 sacks on the year, but he's also allowed a whopping 12 hurries, which is double that of anyone else on the interior. 2 guys on the interior have gotten 6 given up, and one's only gotten 2. Anton Harrison sitting at 12. So imagine you can get in through the tackles a little bit. Plus, whether it's Etienne back there or Tank Bigsby, both of them have some of the worst pass blocking numbers for running backs in the league. So if the pass rush can come from the outside, you're looking pretty good. And that's even to say, Ezra Cleveland, their left guard, while his overall pass blocking numbers are a lot better than either tackles, that man has still given up 3 sacks. So you can get after Trevor Lawrence. So all in all, to sum it all up, this might be one of the more clear path to victory games on the year for the Packers. There's not a lot of numbers in this matchup when you break them all down that really seem to conflict. The Jaguars seemingly have kind of this bona fide weakness. And it happens to be much like we've seen the Packers' defense weakness has been for a few years. Not this year. They're looking good this year. But the last couple of years. So if you can do that, if you can protect Jordan Love from their 2 edge rushers, and you can actually execute over the middle of the field especially, things should go pretty well. And on the defensive side of the ball, make sure that this doesn't become a game where Tank Bigsby can run through you like he's made habit of doing the last couple of weeks. Accomplish those couple things, and realistically, Packers should have this in the bag, even on the road, even in Florida. So let's go Packers 34, Jaguars 17. And yes, this Sunday is the return of our watch parties. Claudia and I will be here, Claudia at least for the second half, but I'll be here the whole game to take you through Packers versus Jaguars. Thanks so much for joining me here on this great Friday, everyone. Do hope you have a fantastic weekend. I'll see you on Sunday. And as always, go Pack, go.